this is, well, it's actually an edited version of an espresso cup. I was down at a wonderful place called Earth's Crust Bakery, fortunately closed during the lockdown, but as well as doing amazing baked goods and everything in Castle Douglas, they've also got a lovely little cafe area. And I was just in there having an espresso, and I sort of glanced down and noticed this really just the beautiful, brilliant yellow cup, and against this blue tablecloth. And I thought, well, okay, quick, I have to have my camera with me, stuck it from above, and shot straight down. And concentric circles, moving out, coffee, cup, saucer, table. It's almost a kind of graphic design, really. But it's also almost entirely symmetrical, from pretty much every angle. The only bit that isn't really is reflection in the coffee itself. Now, as things go, it's okay, and you go, oh, maybe I quite like the colours. But the problem is with absolute symmetry is it loses your interest very quickly. One of the things I've talked about or hinted at in a couple of the last episodes is a sort of notion of dynamic tension. That when there's something just a little bit different out of a photo, you latch onto it a little bit more. It holds your attention. The brain is very good, is sort of evolved, designed to filter out what isn't relevant or what isn't perceived to be relevant. The brain is primed for what's different, because what's different is what our ancestors would have noticed. I'm sure that shape in amongst the grass wasn't there earlier. Perhaps it's a predatory animal that might leap out and pounce on me. Those that had those thoughts were more likely to survive. Those that didn't have those thoughts got eaten and didn't pass on their genetic code. So we are the descendants of those who noticed things that sort of didn't quite sit right. But you can't notice everything. The brain cannot take in all details at all times. So it filters out what it deems not to be relevant. And when you've got something which is completely symmetrical, very quickly you filter it out because you've got the hang of it. You know it's the same from whatever angle, from left to right or top to bottom. So there's nothing more to really say about it. So your brain starts running ahead. But if I go back here and actually just stick the handle back on, now we've got symmetry and a bit. It's not totally symmetrical, but just that little addition of the handle suddenly gives just that little bit more interest. And this is what I mean by asymmetric symmetry. The basis of it is it's symmetrical, but there's an asymmetrical and not quite symmetrical element to it. So it's a very basic thing. And on something like this, you're probably only talking really about somebody looking at it and holding their gaze on it, maybe for an extra fraction of a second or half a second. But don't underestimate that either. If you think about the way we look at photos now, the way we consume them, especially through our social media feeds, we've now kind of got used to scrolling through our feeds at pretty high speed. And if you want your images to be noticed, then they have to sort of grab somebody's attention for that little bit longer than the other ones that are on there. The simple fact that you're watching these podcasts means that you've got an interest in photography. And the problem that we all have is, well, I've taken this photo and I like it, but would anybody else like it? Now, if it's only about whether you like it, that's fine. Go ahead, take your photos. But if you're wanting to put it online and you're wanting to get some kind of response, whether that's at a low level of just somebody clicking like and you getting a nice little kind of warm feeling that somebody's liked what you've done, or you're trying to take it to another level whereby you actually want people to employ you to buy your photography or your photographic skills, then this accumulation of these extra little bits of being able to hold the attention really make a difference. So lots of different things. We've talked about the rule of thirds, we've talked about notion of diagonals. So this week, asymmetrical symmetry, and hopefully that gives you a sense of that. Now that, like I said, is a very basic one. It's just on an espresso cup. But if we go back to the Butler and Crawfordland Castle, then what I can do here is show you a couple of other photos that were taken from the same, when we did the same shoot. So this was an alternative shot where we played around. And here what we've got is very much the symmetrical, but not quite. It's the asymmetry again. I mean, it does sort of obey the rule of thirds if we, sort of, let's do that on a fresh layer, it's easier. The thirds layer is going here, probably something like that. You've got, the heads of the couple right in these corners where we talked about before. We've got the girls sitting along this line. This section frames the butlers. So that kind of works. But what this is really is what we've got this beautiful kind of leaf shape that sort of comes down here. And that's really where the action is happening. And it is, it's got this sort of symmetrical shape, except of course the fact that it isn't quite symmetrical because Simeon is taller than Alistair. We've got female and male. The girls are slightly different. And I think really the fact that you have that asymmetry then adds to that compositional feel to it. We've got other things. The two of them are looking at each other. The girls are wrapped up in their own world. The butlers are being discreet. And so what I love about this photo is you have that sense of that beautiful intimate moment in not actually such an intimate space. But I have a real soft spot. I just love the expressions that they had in that shot. But in compositional terms, this for me is a really good example of asymmetric symmetry. Another one, final one from this shoot was one with Simon with both his girls. And here again we've got that asymmetric symmetry. Girl either side, so we've got this curving round shape, we've got the strong line down the middle, but we've also got the diagonal of the leg, which doesn't line up right. Obviously the girls are slightly different. This one's wearing glasses, this one isn't. So slightly, she's got a little flower in her hair, and the books don't line up perfectly, and it's all the better for that. It makes it a little bit more real, even though it's staged, but it encompasses that notion of symmetry but not quite. So that's really what I wanted to talk about. It's just this idea that sometimes people get really caught up in the idea of rule of thirds, and then they do a picture like this one or like this one, which isn't so obvious rule of thirds and is actually more about, or this one in particular where you've got a very strong central line. Your main subject is smack bang in the centre, and they go, hey, I've broken the rule of thirds, and I've still, but it's a different rule. As I've said before, and I will probably say many times since, rule of thirds to me is a really unfortunate term. It should be guideline of thirds. It is not a rule. It's a useful guideline. Quite often it helps your composition to understand how to divide things up into thirds. But it's not the only guideline. The diagonals are a really strong one, and this asymmetric notion of playing with symmetry, I also feel is a really good one. So it's one to play around with. I mean, you could, if you were doing a still life, you could have a jar of jam sitting on a piece of slate or something, and you could have a strawberry slightly off to one side. If you had a strawberry on both sides, suddenly it wouldn't quite work as well, but a strawberry just off to one side might. Or if you had a house with a double front, so you've got main door at the front and then window either side, and that in itself very, very symmetrical. But a broken flower pot just to one side of the doorstep, suddenly that transforms it. So have a think about that. Next time you're sort of looking at something, you see something quite symmetrical and you quite like it and you're drawn to creating something like that, think about what aspect might be asymmetrical, and can you, if there isn't anything, can you change the camera angle or even place something about in order to give you that, or just kind of look out for it. So that's really, in terms of the whole purpose of this series, which is to try and give you a deeper understanding of photography, that's a lovely little technique to look out for. If you found this useful, let your friends know and hit subscribe.